everybody, this is Mona. We're going to go ahead and get started with day 2 of our IMA for Beginners series, setting up new items in the new item grid. So I am recording today's webinar and I'll be sending out the link later today. I did send out all of the PowerPoints for the week yesterday afternoon, so you should have access to all of the PowerPoints at this point. All right, so let's go ahead and test out the chat feature for the day. If you can hear me and you can see the presentation, let me know the following information. Your data sync provider, it might be OneWorld or OpenText. Those are the two most common ones. It could be another third party, or maybe you don't know or you don't have one. What is your skill level with the new item grid? For example, none, novice, intermediate, or advanced. So as examples, you have OneWorld, intermediate, or don't know, novice. So if you could go ahead and answer those two questions, your data sync provider, level with the new item grid, and I'll come back to those in a moment. Just as a reminder for some webinar etiquette, please be sure to put your phones on mute when you're not speaking. If you're listening through your computer's microphone, if you're listening through your computer, please be sure to mute your computer's microphone, and you can access that by going to Control Panel, Sound, and Recording tab. I really appreciate it if you do mute, so it helps to minimize the background noise. You can ask questions at any time using the chat feature. Please be sure to send the chat to all participants, or I might not see it to the very end. If you're going to audibly ask questions, I prefer you do it when you'll either see this blue bubble graphic with the question mark, or I might ask if there's any questions too. All right, so I did ask a couple of questions. We got a few responses. Don't know, none, so brand new to the grid. Novice, none, novice, none. Okay, so most of you, it looks like, are brand new to the grid, and a couple of you don't know which data sync provider you use. One of them knows it's OneWorld. One of them says they don't have one. So I'm going to address that here in a minute if you don't have a data sync provider. So yesterday we did cover the IMA basics and terminology. Today we're doing setting up new items in a grid. Tomorrow we're going to be moving on to IMA features and then maintenance on day 4. So a couple of points that I wanted to address before we move on to the objectives for today. We do require a data sync provider to be used by all new vendors. We will not provide you with IMA access if you're a new vendor until you've done your first sync over from your data sync provider. There are some exceptions to this, mainly if you have to build certain carton types, such as mixed cartons, assorted cartons, pallets actually being built in the system as pallets, or sellable cartons. Those cartons cannot be synced over and they do have to be built manually. So if you're building exploding assortments or uniform cartons or each cartons, you should have a data sync provider. If you would like more information about that, you can always email either IMA help or vendors@searshc.com. If you do have to build manually, we plan to eventually offer a recurring webinar for manual item build, but the date is TBD. I'd hoped to already have this out, but every time I think we're going to have the resources to get it together, something more important and pressing happens, and we have to reallocate our resources. So I do hope to eventually be able to have the time to put this together for you and do a manual item build webinar. But in the meantime, if you need immediate assistance, you don't have to wait. You can reach out to IMA help at searshc.com. They will walk you through the process of doing manual build. You may not have that many items that you build. You may only build maybe 6 items a year or 10 items a year. If that's the case, you may not want to spend your time trying to relearn the grid each year that you have maybe a seasonal item that's going out. So we do have another option for you. You can let SHC build your items for you. It's $5 per G10. So for most typical items, that means it's going to be $10 total per item, $5 for the retail UPC, and $5 for the shipping G10. If you would like more information about that, I did provide a link as well as an email address. I don't actually work with the SHC item build, so it's separate from me, but I did want to provide that for you in case that's something you're interested in. All right, so moving on to today. The purpose of this session is to demonstrate how to set up new items using the new item grid. After completing this session, you will identify how to access IMA and IMA resources. You will understand how to set up new items in the new item grid, and you will understand how to utilize the grid history to access in-process grids and review pending errors. All right, so first we're going to talk about IMA access. Some of you may have already been in IMA. If you have not been into IMA yet, you may or may not have access. So you can try to log in and see if it lets you in. If it does not allow you to log in, you need to request access. And you do that by clicking My Profile in the menu bar on the vendor portal. When you do that, it's going to come up with this display box. And you scroll down and you click IMA here. And then it will display some additional information once you click IMA. And you can then select the box next to IMA Item Maintenance Application. You will then scroll down and verify this information and click Save. Note at that point you will not have immediate access. The access will be processed within 2 business days. And if your vendor, if you as a vendor company are brand new to SHC, then we will not provide access until you've done your first sync over. If you are just a new employee with an existing vendor, then you should have access within 2 days. So to access the application, on the vendor portal main page, you click IMA under the applications group. That will take you to the IMA portal, and from there you can click Access IMA under IMA Login, and that will take you to the application. We do highly recommend that you access the application from this portal rather than bookmarking it directly. If there are any system issues, or if we know that the site's going to be down for a deploy coming up, then we will actually post a message on this site. So if you bookmark the application directly, you will have no visibility to any messages about upcoming deploys or any system issues. All right, next we're going to talk real quick about some system requirements. What single issue does the help desk receive the most calls about? The single issue that they receive the most calls about actually has to do with browser compatibility. So IMA was built to work the best with Internet Explorer 8. So if you use version 9, 10, or 11, you will need to set compatibility view. You should not try working in IMA using Firefox or Chrome. It may let you in, and you may be able to get a few pages to work for you, but eventually it's not going to work for you anymore. It's basically just going to kind of break. Sometimes it just freezes. Sometimes it'll flash on your screen and you can't do anything else with it. So make sure that you do use Internet Explorer and that you also set compatibility view. If you don't set compatibility view, same thing, it's eventually going to break on you. Something's not going to work. You're going to click a button and it won't work, or the grid won't be able to scroll. So make sure that you do set compatibility. If you don't know what version of Internet Explorer you have, you can go to Help and About Internet Explorer. It'll pop up with the screen here. Here, this is version 8. So if it does not say version 8, you will need to follow these steps. If you click Tools and then click Compatibility View Settings, it will open up this window. And you can type in mykmart.com and click Add. It'll then move down to this white box here, and whenever it has mykmart.com in this white box, you know the compatibility mode has been set. A word of note, many of your companies may push out automated system updates to your laptops or your desktops if you're on desktop. And I know I've heard from some vendors that sometimes when this happens, it resets their compatibility view settings. So if you've been working in IMA without an issue and suddenly you're having some weird issues like the scroll bar is missing or the filters are missing, come back here and double check you still have compatibility mode set, because sometimes those system updates pushed out by your company can reset that. So any questions so far? I think somebody has their mic open. I'm hearing some background noise. So if you can make sure if you're not speaking, if you can mute your microphones, that would be great. Okay, moving on, we're going to go to IMA resources and help. So when you're within IMA, there are several options for some self-help. Up at the very top, if you click resources, it's going to drop down with this list. Some of these are for internal users, some of them are for vendors. I marked the ones that would be relevant to you as vendors. So if you'd like to learn more about the data synchronization process, you can click here. This is IMA documentation and training for vendors. Quick solutions, many vendors find this helpful if you just need a quick answer, such as replacing a UPC. And then there's also a link to your IMA portal. Down at the bottom, if you click Help Desk, it will actually display some more information along with the Help Desk phone number, as well as a link to a form that you can complete that will be sent to the Help Desk. If you click the Help button up here in the very top right, that actually opens the online help file, which will look like this. The very first page you see are the most recent updates. As vendors, I recommend in the content section that you focus on the data catalog vendors. If you're not a data catalog user, there is also this IMA vendor support. If you have difficulty locating what you're looking for, the index and search feature actually work really well, and that's actually what I use most of the time when I'm trying to look up information. So online training is available 24/7. If you go to the Vendor University tab and go to IMA Online Training, it'll load this page. If you click this here, you can view some old training videos and getting started in the grid. They're a little bit out of date, but mostly they're still useful with the information that's presented. And then down here under IMA Guides and Documentation, there's the Data Catalog and Vendor Guide, and then the PDF documents down here are more standalone documents. So if you use One World Sync or GXS, which is open text, you can view the mapping files here. You can also view some quick step documentation, such as adding vendor packs, cost changes, and so forth. And many of those quick steps documentations will be covered in the maintenance session on Thursday. We also offer some on-site training. So for the on-site training, it's offered typically every quarter, and you will receive hands-on for the IMA New Item Grid, Maintenance in IMA, and Mass Change classes. There's also a 2.5-hour session on a workbench that takes place in the afternoon. So we are next offering that April 26th. So if you would like to come to the on-site training on April 26th, please make sure that you sign up sooner than later, because we do require a minimum amount to be signed up by, I think, April 11th, or we will be canceling it. So any questions so far? All right, so that's mainly the resources and how you can find some self-help and online training that's available 24/7. So now we're getting into the main bulk of today's session, which is all about the new item grid. So if you could use the chat feature and let me know, what is your biggest struggle with the new item grid? If you haven't been in the new item grid yet, you don't have to answer this. But if you have been in the new item grid and you've worked with it a little bit, let me know, what do you struggle with the most? And I'm going to come back and look at this in a few slides. So what is the grid? The grid is a Flash-based spreadsheet used to complete data. It's used by vendors who send items to IMA using data synchronization. And one of the best points about it is that you can work up to 50 items at a time. If you're setting things up manually, you typically have to build them one at a time. So if you can sync over your items, not only does it sync over with information, but any additional information that has to be added can be added to multiple items at the same time. Some things to be aware of with data syncing. Items are not always immediately available in IMA after syncing. So there are transmission times for each of the data sync providers. For One World Sync, the transmission time is hourly between 2 a.m. and 11 p.m., except after 12 p.m. on Saturdays, Eastern Time. And then for OpenText, their transmission times occur 3 times a day at 12 a.m., 4 p.m., and 12 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have a third-party provider, you should reach out to that provider to find out when their syncing times are. So basically, if you've synced over your items and then you go in and you try to pull them up in your new item task list and they aren't there yet, don't immediately reach out to IMA help. See if the transmission time has occurred since you over that sync. And if it hasn't, wait for until after the transmission time. If your items still aren't there, then you can reach out to IMA help. But otherwise, they'll just repeat this information to you because they can't do anything until that transmission time occurs.
Okay, perfect.
So there are a lot of fields that can be synced over from your data sync provider, but we do require some additional fields on the grid to be set up. And we also allow some additional fields that are not necessarily required, but that you may want to complete. So this table lists all of the non-data catalog fields that can be updated on the grid. Not all of these are required. Some of them, such as projected first insert date, ship points, brand, those are all required. There's a few of these that are, but not all of these are. So we're going to go do a quick overview with the PowerPoint for the new item grid setup. And then we're actually going to, I'm going to show you a demo and actually go into the IMA training environment application and walk you through in more detail. All right, so when you start off, you hover over Data Catalog and you click New Items. One thing to take note of is that items in the new item task list are automatically deleted after 60 days of inactivity. So if you've synced over items and then you just let them sit in your task list and you don't do anything with them and then you come back 3 months later, they aren't going to be there. They will have been removed from your task list. It's not a big deal. To get them back in your task list, you would just need to resync from your data sync provider. If you know that you won't be approving them for 3 months or 4 months, maybe you're renegotiating with the buyer or something, and you want to make sure that they don't get removed from your task list before you get to them, all you have to do is bring them up in your task list and put them on a grid, or just do something with them and touch them, and then that 60-day timer will reset. So you enter your search criteria, and then you click Get Task List. Now you don't need to enter all of this information, but you do need to enter at least one of the fields. If you enter in too much, then you may have too much criteria and nothing matches. If you don't enter in enough, then it may bring back a large number of search results, and it can be difficult for you to find what you're looking for. So I find that the load date from and to could be really useful. If you know you synced over items 2 weeks ago and then you synced over items yesterday and you're looking for the items that you synced over 2 weeks ago, you can enter in a date range here. Also, if you have multiple paid items numbers that's associated with your ID, maybe you're a vendor rep and you work for multiple vendor companies, you can select the paid items number that is associated with the items you're looking for here. And then there's some additional ones here as well. Once you enter your information, you click Get Task List. It will load your task list. Most likely you won't have this many items in your task list. But you locate the items that you're looking for, and then you select it over here in the very far left column, the ones that you want to work, and you would click Create Grid. It's going to ask some information about the grid. So any information you enter on this section will be applied to all of the items within your grid. So you can work up to 50 items in a grid, and they can have different information, but these specific fields have to be the same for every item that's on the grid. So that means everything on this grid is going to be set up for Division 24. It's going to be set up with this specific order duns. It's going to be set up for SHC Category 1, Subcat 1, and the flow type DSD. You'll notice subcategory does not have a red asterisk. It's not required at this point. It will be required before you can approve your grid, but you can have different subcategories for different items on your grid, and that's because it does not have the red asterisk. So then it will load your grid, and it will look like this. The default view is going to be empty required. So all of your empty required fields will display, and so you can work on filling those out left to right until they are all complete. Be sure to save your grid frequently. I believe it times out after 30 minutes of not being saved. So if you do quite a bit of work on your grid and then you get up from your desk, maybe you go to a meeting or you go to lunch and you didn't save it, when you come back, you will have lost all of the work that you did. So be sure that you do save your grid frequently. Once you've completed all of the information, you click Approve, and it will check for errors. So I wanted to go over some additional information that you see on your grid. Information about the grid displays at the top. So here under grid type, we see N. N stands for new. You'll learn through tomorrow and on Thursday, there are different types of grids that you could be working in. You could have returned items, and that would be a returned items grid, changes grid. So there's some different ones. So N stands for new grid. All of the items on this grid reside in Division 24 in Category 1. All of the items on this grid are going to be set up with flow type DC, and they will all be set up with the DUNS number listed here. Over here on the right under Save, you will see this lock icon. So if this icon is set like this, that means it's locked. And what that does mean in practicality is that all of these fields from description line 2 in the left, the ones with the black heading, they will stay stationary, and whenever you scroll left to right, only the fields to the right of the black-headed columns will actually move left to right. Now if you click this and unlock it, then that means the screen as a whole, so every single one of these columns from KSN onwards, will scroll left to right. So that's helpful if you're working with a smaller screen resolution, maybe on your laptop. Whereas if you have it plugged into a larger monitor, you may be fine just leaving it locked. And that way you always know, you can always see the description of the specific items you're working on. So the selected view status will always display in the top left corner. I mentioned that the default view when you first create your grid is empty required. So here we can see that that's what's selected with the radio button. And in the top left, you will see empty required. You can also click all, and that will bring back every single field that you have access to update. Additionally, you can click into the specific tabs to find specific fields that way. Because if you know you're looking for, let's say, the package configuration, if you click all, that's going to bring back a lot of fields that you're going to have to scroll through to try to find the package configuration. If you know that that lives on the Packages tab, you could just click Packages tab, and it'll narrow down the list of fields that you're searching for. Okay, so I'm going to log into IMA, and we're going to go through a quick demo. Okay, 1 second. This is the training environment does this sometimes, where it just says your login was successful, but it didn't actually log me in, and I lose it. So give me 1 second to update that. And let me reshare. Okay, so you should see IMA now. All right. So again, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click Data Catalog, or you can hover over Data Catalog and go to New Items. And it's going to load this page. I have a specific G10 that I'm looking for, so I'm going to go grab that really fast. Okay. And this is a shipping G10, but I'm going to put it marking field. An error that happens a lot when you can't find your items, if you're looking for a specific G10, is that they will put the G10 for a shipping carton into the retail marking G10 field. Or vice versa, they might be looking for just an individual each, and they actually will place that into the shipping marking field. If you do that and you click a task list, you're not going to get anything back in your search results. So again, there were some other options you had for searching. You have description, vendor stock number, your pay DUNS number if you have more than one, and load date as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click Get Task List. Now, if you just entered your pay DUNS number, you probably would have brought back a lot more items within your task list depending on what you had synced over. So if you have a lot of items in your task list and you want to further filter it, there are filters down at the bottom. So down at the bottom is where you could select maybe vendor stock number, or you could select a specific load date. You could enter part of a description, or you could enter a retail marking number or shipping marking number. Now, a quick note about descriptions. It is going to be verbatim. So if you accidentally put in maybe an extra space or a period, if it's not in the actual description, then it's not going to come back with any search results. If you set too many filters and you don't end up getting anything back, or you're not finding what you're looking for, you can always click this Reset Clear All Filters on the bottom left. So the first thing you do when you get into your task list, you're going to locate the item you're wanting. I just have one, the one shipping G10, since that's what I entered. And you're going to click that plus sign here to explode it out. And what this does is it lets you see all of the eaches associated with that carton. Double check and make sure that all of the eaches for this carton are here. If there are any missing, let's say that the size 8 was missing, or it's supposed to have a size 6 here. At this point you would stop, not process your items when there are missing eaches, and you would go back to your data sync provider and try to resync that item. So if all of your items are displaying here, then you would go ahead and click the box under Select Column on the very far left, and you would click Create Grid. Yeah, there is, I don't think Guest A16 would know that we're A16, but somebody does have their mic open, and we're hearing some conversations in the background. So if you could mute your mic, that would be great. Otherwise, I'm going to have to mute everybody, and I really prefer not to do that. So I'll give you a few seconds to figure out how to mute it, and then I'll I'm going to go ahead and click Create Grid. They are hearing me, so I'm just going to mute everybody, and I'll unmute everyone at the end.
All participants are now in listen-only mode.
Okay, so if I forget, someone just send me a message at the end to unmute at the end, because I do like to give you the opportunity to ask audible questions, because some people find that easier. But yeah, it does get really distracting after a while. So after you click Create Grid, it's going to show this screen here. And this is where you're entering information about your grid. So I'm going to, I have a screen that I'm looking at. Let's see, 24 is my division. And for my order DUNS, you will not have this pop up. You should have just a drop-down list of the order DUNS that are associated with your ID. I actually have to search for mine. Okay, and then you're going to select your category. I'm going to go ahead and select my subcategory. You don't have to at this point. You can select it within the grid as well. And then finally, you select your flow type. Now let's say that your buyer wanted you to select DC, but it wasn't an option in the drop-down menu. That does happen sometimes. And why that happens is because your order dones is not set up for that flow type. So if you ever run into that situation, I would first reach out to your buyer, make sure that that's the flow type they're actually wanting you to select. And if it is the correct flow type, double check that you're using the order dones they're wanting you to use, because you may have multiple order dones. If you only have one order dones, then you don't really have any other options. So at this point, if that is your only order dones, or if that's the one that they definitely want you to use, they will have to start a request with vendor onboarding to get your order done set up for the additional flow type that you might be missing. So I'm going to go ahead and click DC. And once you've entered all this information, you click Apply. It takes a minute. How long it takes depends on how many items you're putting on your grid, as well as just how busy the system is at that point. This is the training environment, so sometimes it's really fast, and other times it's a little bit slower. It's being a little bit slower today. But there we go. All right, so this is the default view. Like I mentioned, this is the empty required view. So these are all empty required fields here to the right. So we're going to work through those together. So the very first one that you see, and just so you know, if you're maybe working alongside me as I'm doing this, or you watch the video as you try to do it right alongside it, you may see these columns in different orders. You may not see all of these fields. Some of these fields can actually be synced over, like the dimensions and the weights. They can be synced over. Since these are in our training environment, they're blank, and I kind of wanted to show you how to fill them out anyways. So first one for our brand. You just click it, it pops up in this box, and you can start typing in your brand name. It's going to bring up everything that matches that brand name. And you can just select it and click Apply. Once you get to your eaches, you can actually click Copy Down, and it's going to copy down to all of your eaches. Unfortunately, you can't copy down from cartons to eaches, so you do have to select those separately. But once you get to your eaches, you can just click Copy Down, and it's going to copy it straight down to all of the eaches. Your dimension unit of measure. Typically, most of our vendors will be using US standard inches. And then this is your depth, width, and height. So this would be the depth, width, and height of the eaches first. That's what I'm doing right now. And again, you see these double black arrows to the right of the field. You can actually click that and copy down the values. All right, so then you have to enter the dimensions, the depth, width, and height for your carton. Now you don't just add this up, because you have to actually take into account the total number within that carton, because there may be multiples of some of these eaches. So if you're not sure how many are in that carton that you're working on at the time, you can click the Packages tab up here in the top left, and now we're seeing all of the Package tab fields. Under Member Quantity, I can see that this carton has a total of 12. All right, so if you click Empty Required, it will reload those empty required fields. And I'm going to try that. And this should actually be the depth, width, and height of the box that your items are being shipped in. It does have to meet the minimum cube value, which I purposely did not put the correct values in so that we'll get an error at the end and we can come back and look at this again. So it does have to be the minimum cube value, but it can be larger than that as well, because this is the carton that your item's going in. And doubt that any of the vendors actually have customized boxes for every single shipment. You probably have maybe 3, 5, or 6 standard size boxes that you use to ship your product. So there will likely be some extra space in there. So the next field we have is weight unit of measure. Again, most vendors will be using US pounds. And let's say each of these weighs 1 pound. So I know you only see 6 eaches here. And so a lot of vendors just want to add up those, and they would put 6 here for the carton weight. But if you remember, we looked at the package configuration, and there's actually a total of 12 in this carton. So 6 would not add up correctly. Some of these are multiples within the carton. So this one should actually be 12, because each one of them weighs 1 pound, and there are 12 within that carton. All right. So moving on, we're going to go to country of origin. And you just start entering in the country, and it will find it, it'll search for it as you type it in. And then you can click Add. Now if you have multiple countries, let's say if it's a drill, and part of the drill is made in China, and part of it's made in India, you can add multiple countries here. So once you've done your selection, you can click Copy Down. You'll notice that the exploding assortment, the carton, some of the fields are grayed out. If it's grayed out, you can't actually enter information there. So that means you don't have to worry about those fields for the exploding assortment. Okay, next we have HTS codes. So you remember I mentioned sometimes these can be a bit tricky to locate. So these are jeans. If I were to start typing in jeans, once I click search, you'll see it didn't bring back any search results. Okay, so let's think of another name for jeans. Let's say it's just pants. Again, there's a few options here, but most of these are underpants. It looks like these right here are possibly regular pants. So let's say that's the closest thing to what I'm looking for. I would select that and click Add. Again, it doesn't have to be exact. It can be difficult to find an exact match. Just find the closest match that you can. And then you would click Copy Down. So our next field is the fabric metal content. So this is apparel, so it is going to be fabric. I'm going to choose, let's say, cotton. And then you click Add. Just like with the countries, you can add multiple fibers as well. So you can add multiple fabrics or multiple metal contents. You do have to enter a percentage, and this percentage total has to add up to 100. So if you have a second fabric here, then those 2 percentages would have to add up to 100. Once you've selected that, you can click Copy Down. So the next few fields are questions, hazardous questions. And if you hover over the column heading, it will display that question in full. So this first question is asking, does this product or accompanying accessory contain any of the following? And it lists out aerosol, chemical, pesticide. It does give some more information in the apparel, appliances, electronics, footwear, tools, etc. Should answer no. So this is an apparel item, so I'm going to select no. And again, these 2 black arrows to the right will copy down that answer. So hovering over the second question, this one is asking, does the product contain PVC? I'm going to select no and drop that down. And then the third question is asking, does the product packaging contain PVC? So again, I'm going to select no and drop that down as well. Okay, so this is the hazard storage code. So if we look at this drop-down list, you can see 0 is not hazardous. That's what we're going to select for this one. But I did want to show you some of the other options that you have. You have hazardous aerosols, flammable liquids, motor oils and cooking oils, oxidizing pool chemicals, body product contaminants, non-body product contaminants, pet foods and pet chews, and food products, consumables, and edibles. So a lot of people wouldn't think that they would select a hazard code specifically for pet foods or for consumable foods, but it does have a hazard code, and again, that is important to know because if it's something that's edible, we don't necessarily want to store it next to certain types of product with chemicals. Also, we need to know if there's perishable date, so any perishable items would likely have a storage code. So I'm going to select 0, not hazardous, because this is apparel. All right, so next to that, we have cost and member cost. So these costs should typically match, and they should be what you agreed upon with your buyer. So I'm going to enter $9.99 for each of those and copy it down. Now you do have to enter it for this exploding assortment, but what's really nice is when you enter it for member cost, it automatically calculates it for the exploding assortment member cost. So we can just enter that same value under the cost column. All right, so our next field that we're going to be looking at is the primary store format. So these are Kmart items. These items are going to be going to a Kmart store, so I would select Kmart here. Most of you will be selecting Kmart or Sears, unless you also maybe work with one of the other store formats that we do. I'm going to select Kmart and copy down. Next, we have our ship points. So this is ship all from. This is where you want us to come to pick up your product. So you would select your ship point, and then you can copy down. Again, I did mention yesterday that you can set different ship points for different DC locations. You cannot do that during the initial setup process, so you would have to just select one here, and then after it's operational, you can go do a change request, and you can set different ship points for different DC locations at that time, and we will go over that on Thursday. So the next field is vendor applied EAS tag. So I'm going to select no, but again, that's the security tag that sometimes is put on products. And then next to that, we have the projected first in-store date. So this is the date that you are expecting your product to be sold in our stores. Typically, you probably get this information from your merchant. Your merchant should be providing you with some information such as projected first in-store date, your flow type, the agreed upon cost, your SHC hierarchy. So if you don't know what the in-store date should be, you can always reach out to your buying team. All right, so the next question is asking if your item requires a Prop 65 warning. So just like with the hazardous questions, if you put your mouse over the column heading, it will display the full question. So notice that there are two no answers. The first one is no, it does not contain any California Prop 65 chemicals and does not require a warning. The second no question is it may contain substances, but they do not exceed the limits. So those are the differences between the two no questions. So this is apparel. We're going to say it doesn't have PVC, so I'm going to choose the first one. It does not contain any Prop 65 chemicals, and I'm going to drop that down. And the second question is asking if there's a warning label on the package. We're going to say no, and I will drop that down. So again, with the hazardous information and the questions about PVC, if you don't know the answer, talk to someone within your business because you do want to make sure that you are answering these correctly. All right, so notice this one's not required because it does not have the red asterisk. If you do not enter it here, that's fine. This will actually be updated by the merchant. So this is actually the last required field, EAS tag required indicator. You may remember it's located on both the vendor pack tab and the item tab, so that's why we're seeing it twice. So just make sure that they coordinate together. All right, so I should have saved my grid. I'm not going to save it at this point because I'm just going to go ahead and approve it. But remember that you should save your grid frequently, or you could possibly lose some of your work. So once you have saved your grid, it goes to this page and it processes your grid. So it's checking for errors right now. So we're going to come back to this page in a moment. We're going to go through some slides in the PowerPoint in the meantime. And we're going to talk about grid history. So whenever you're waiting for your grid to process, you don't just have to stay on that page. You can go ahead and start working on some additional items from your new item task list. You could close out of IMA completely, so you don't just have to leave it there and wait. To get back to your grid history, you just hover over Data Catalog and click Grid History. And then you would enter your search criteria and click Search. So most likely, you could just get away with entering your user ID. So the user ID that approved the grid right here. And then you would click Search. There are a lot of other options. If you're doing maybe a lot of work in IMA and you have different grid types, you could choose what grid type you're looking for. You could choose which order dones you were working with. Maybe you're a vendor rep and you set up items for 10 different companies. So you could narrow down your results that way. But for most people, entering your user ID should do the trick. It'll bring back all of your grid history. And over here on the left, you can see your status and the status description. So when you first approve your grid, you see this queued status. So it's waiting to be processed. While it's processing, you see this running man. And then it will either come back as completed down here with the green check mark, or check for errors. Now, if you've created a grid and you've saved it, but you haven't approved it yet, it will display as active. And then if you created a grid but you never saved it, it would display as initiated, and it would have the red exclamation point because it wasn't actually saved. So that means any work you did on it wouldn't have saved. So also a quick call out. Once you hit approve, if there are no errors, then everything that is on that grid is going to be out of your row from that point, and it's going to be going to the merchant row. And you're not going to be able to pull that grid back up. So if you need those KSNs, then I would recommend before you click approve, that's the point where you should be copying down those KSNs, or you could even take a screenshot of your grid so that you have a record of the KSNs. And like I mentioned before, there are different grid types. So here under valid values, you can see C is the changes grid. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. New items grid is what we're talking about today. Tomorrow we will also be talking about return new items and return changes grid. And these are the values that indicate which type of grid it is. So here under grid type in the third column to the right, that's where you find that information. All right, so let's go back and check on the status of the grid we just did. So you'll see that there's an error. It has the exclamation point here and it says check for errors. So to re-access my grid and view the errors, I'm going to click this grid button under the action column. It's going to bring my grid up. And, oh, I'm going to have a couple of errors. So here it says I have 9 errors and 7 warnings. So you have 2 options to view those errors. You can click this plus sign on the top right of the red section. It'll drop down so you can scroll down. Unless you just have a few errors, I actually prefer clicking the View Errors in New Window button so that you don't have to scroll through that small section. It makes it a little bit easier to read. So here we can see, looks like I have a converted cube error. So if you look at the field, it says converted cube. Under message, it says that the carton cube is less than the sum of the each's cube. So that means my carton dimensions are smaller than the cube sum value of all of the each's. So we're going to go back and fix that. If I scroll down, I'm seeing if there's anything besides converted cube. Here you see warnings. Now warnings can be ignored. You don't have to do anything to fix warnings. So we're going to just leave those blank. And then finally, I have one more error. I didn't populate the primary store format for, it's my floating assortment. But if you don't know which KSN it is, over here on the far left, you can see the KSN that this applies to specifically. All right, so I'm going to close out of my errors window. And you'll notice, depending on the field, sometimes when there is an error, it will automatically display that error in the default view and highlight it in red. And it did that with the primary store format. So I really like when it does that because it makes it easy to find and it's easy for you to know what you need to fix. But it doesn't do that with all of the fields. I really wish that it did because I think it would be just simpler. So our other error was the converted cube. Well, it's not showing in the default view, so that means you have to locate the tab that that field lives on. Converted cube lives on the Packages tab because it describes the carton that you're shipping. So I'm going to click Packages. And, oh good, I'm glad it did this. So occasionally, especially if you're working on your laptop, you may find that the scroll bar at the bottom is suddenly missing. It is actually there. You just need to scroll down here on the right side, and now here's the scroll bar on the bottom. So that always trips up vendors whenever they come in for training. It always happens to somebody. So I'm glad that it did that so I could show you. All right, so I'm going to scroll to the right. All right, there's my depth, width, and height values. Okay, so if I take 10 times 4 times 2 is 80, and then there's 12 of these in this carton, that means that my minimum cube sum value has to be 960. If it's less than 960, I'm going to get the error, which is what happened. The cube value that I currently have for the carton is only 480. So that's why I'm getting a hard error. So let's say, oh, I entered this wrong. The height of the carton is actually 12. Well, now we know that this is 960. That's the minimum that it has to be. So if I were to hit approve at this point, it would go through fine. But like I said, it can actually be more than that. I'll type in 14 just so you can see. So now it's more than 960, and that's okay. As long as it's not grossly larger, then it should go through. So I'm going to go ahead and click approve again, and it's going to work on processing. Go back to PowerPoint. All right, so some key points to remember. Double check that all your items have synced over for the carton before working the items through a grid. If you have any missing eaches, then you should not try to work those items through. You should go back to your data sync provider and try to resync. Your buyer should be providing key information for item setup, such as DUNS, flows, store format, SHC hierarchy, required carton types, and agreed upon costs. Now some of these, if you always set your items up the same way every time, then some of these you may not need. But if you have different setups especially, or if you're brand new, this is information you should be getting from your buyer to make sure that you're setting things up correctly. So if you don't get this information and you don't know what it should be, reach out to your buying team. Don't just guess. Always double check that the carton dimensions and weights are correct. And then finally, save your grid frequently because you don't want to lose any work that you do. So that's always really frustrating. And let me check real quick. Okay, so the grid's still processing. I was hoping to show you that it was completed. But whenever it is completed, it says that here under status description, and then over on the left, it has the green circle with the check mark. And you'll notice it just like flashed. Whenever it stays on this page, it automatically refreshes, and so that was what's flashing. So it's still processing at this time, but it should say completed here in a few minutes. All right, so at this time, do you have any questions? I'm going to go back to the webinar and unmute everybody. Give me 1 second.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
Okay, so any questions about setting up items in a new item grid? Make sure there's nothing in the chat. Anything. Okay, so if you don't have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and I will stay on the line a little bit longer in case you want to ask something later. But otherwise, I hope you have a great day, and I will be sending out the video link later today, and I will see you guys tomorrow.